back to the Zoom room. Another Art of Letting Go live session, day 12 of the course, Art of Letting Go course. So shall we dive in to our email? Kick it off with a quote as usual. So let me share my screen with you. Make it a bit bigger for you. If you can kick it off with this quote from Eckhart Tolle. Yeah, if you can read that quote, Elaine.
The realm of consciousness is much faster than thought can grasp. When you no longer believe everything you think, you step out of thought and see clearly that the thinker is not who you really are. Eckhart Tolle. Yeah.
Great quote.
Reminds
you that he's reminding us that we're not the thinker or the thoughts that we think, but unconditioned infinite consciousness, what Yeshua calls spirit in A Course in Miracles. So we actually discussed the difference between consciousness, as Yeshua defines it in A Course in Miracles, and spirit, or an alternative Art of Letting Go language, pure formless awareness, in today's recorded discussion. So we went into some detail, but we'll look at it quickly. So I took some excerpts from section 2 of chapter 1, section 4 of chapter 3, and the clarification of terms in which Yeshua defines what consciousness is. So if you want to read that quote from the course. Consciousness is the state that induces action.
Where? I can't see it.
Right there. Consciousness is...
Oh, sorry. Yes, I can see where you... Yeah, sorry, yeah. I just looked... yeah, got you there. Consciousness is the state that induces action, though it does not inspire it. Consciousness, the level of perception, was the first split introduced into the mind after the separation, making the mind a perceiver rather than a creator.
Yeah, so just pause it there. Let's just break it down.
Yeah.
That's what he's saying here in the first couple of sentences. It's a state that induces action, though it does not inspire it. And so consciousness is involved with action. We have ideas, we act on them, we speak words, we take actions. Very much about our state of consciousness in this world. You know? So, and then he goes on to say consciousness is the level of perception. And it was the first split introduced into the mind after the separation, making the mind a perceiver rather than a creator. So let's look at it in diagrammatic form. I'm just going to take you across to course manual. So in this diagram, the descent into hell, you see it quite clearly. There you go. So what he's saying here, it is the consciousness is the level of perception, right? So once you go into consciousness, you're in perception, not truth, not knowledge. You're in another domain. And consciousness is the first split in the mind introduced after the separation, yeah? So you see that clearly in the diagram. There's an idea of separation, and now you have this entity that comes into being, apparently in our minds, called the ego or consciousness. Also called the universal mind by some traditions. We call it the belief in separation. It's Satan in most religious traditions, or the devil. Most people think that this is God. To mention what we discussed. They say God is this consciousness, and God created all things. God created the heavens and the earth. That's the myth of creation. So God did all of this, and they don't realize that this is a false God. This God is actually the God of the ego. This is the devil. This is the illusion of a God that they've made up because they wanted to be a separate self. And this is what he's highlighting here. So the terminology in the course is very clear. Consciousness is the domain of the ego. Don't call consciousness and spirit the same thing, because they're not. Some teachers use consciousness as, universal consciousness. They use it synonymously with spirit or awareness. But in course terminology, it's not. So for instance, here in the map of consciousness, this is David Hawkins's work. He uses pure consciousness to describe the process at the very top level of enlightenment, 700 to 1,000. But this in course language, that would be better changed to pure awareness or pure formless awareness. So we use awareness rather than consciousness to denote spirit. Pure formless awareness is spirit. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Whereas consciousness is the first split. It's the thought of separation is real. I'm separate, and therefore now we create a world based on that premise of separation, which is an illusion. So the consciousness then is the ego. And that's a very different understanding of consciousness from what many teachers and the whole New Age movement teaches, because they're teaching that this is the ultimate. Jesus is saying, no, it's not the ultimate at all. In fact, it's the ultimate delusion. You need to get to it. You need to understand it to undo the delusion. So you've got to rise up and go back up the ladder and start realizing that everything is just coming from this false ego consciousness or belief in separation. And all of this comes from that. The entire world you see, the world of perception, of time, space, duality, that's all a product of this consciousness. So that is the false consciousness. That's the false idea that gave birth to a false illusion, or a false reality. And now you start to be able to make sense of it. If you understand this, then everything that follows from a false consciousness and a false idea of separation must then be false. Correct. Only what is false can come from false. You can't expect truth to come from falsehood. So everything then that proceeds from that, the idea of being an individual self and the guilt and the sin for apparently now destroying God or pure formless awareness, and then everything that follows from that idea of guilt and sin, the fear, the attack, the concept of a fearful, wrathful God that's going to punish you, the fear of that punishment. Then you try and project your guilt outwards onto others, and you accuse and blame and attack them. This cycle of accusation, blame, and attack just carries on. Now you perceive yourself as a helpless, enervated victim of the world, set against all these cruel forces that are just trying to hurt you and ultimately destroy you. All of that is illusion, because the idea from which it all came is false. And now you're starting to get somewhere. Now you're starting to understand what's really going on in this world.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important that we stick to the terminology, because if you fudge this, and I've even heard, course teachers going, oh, well, it's consciousness. No. Let's not mix things up, right? If you're going to teach the course, use the language of the course, because that gives clarity. If you call consciousness spirit and you're mixing them up, you're getting people confused. Don't mix them up. He's clearly saying consciousness here, you want to carry on, is correctly identified as the domain of the ego.
Yeah.
Consciousness is the ego, in other words.
Consciousness is correctly identified as the domain of the ego. Consciousness is the receptive mechanism receiving messages from above or below, from the Holy Spirit, the remembrance of perfect love, or the ego, belief in separation and separate self. Consciousness has levels and awareness can shift quite dramatically, but it cannot transcend the perceptual realm. At its highest, it becomes aware of the real world and can be trained to do so increasingly. Yet the very fact that it has levels and can be trained demonstrates that it cannot reach knowledge.
So what's he saying there?
Well, the consciousness is actually the ego, and it's receiving messages above and below from the Holy Spirit, above and below.
Yeah, so this can be confusing, but what he's really saying is that consciousness has the ability to listen to another voice, right? So there is in consciousness the seed of hope, because you can actually hear another voice, being the Holy Spirit or the remembrance of perfect love, or you can hear the voice for consciousness that just says, well, this is all there is, right? There's only this separate self and there's only separation and that's all there is, and just accept it. You can within consciousness, there is the Holy Spirit's awareness, the remembrance of perfect loving awareness that can come in to that consciousness and give you another perception of it.
Right.
Which is the only reason why we can be saved and free, because there is actually a way to transcend that consciousness from within starting with consciousness, and you believing you're separate. You can still hear the Holy Spirit within that. So you can receive messages from above, the higher mind or higher awareness, and you can listen to them, and you can start making a different choice, which raises you up the levels of consciousness. And he's talking about levels here. So you go through the levels of consciousness as you climb up this ladder. You're gonna start raising your consciousness. This is a new age term to say, well, you're raising your consciousness. What does that mean? It means you're going up in your awareness, up in your understanding, so that instead of being identified with a very limited little separate self, you start undoing some of that programming and you start perceiving from a bigger perspective. You start seeing a more holistic view. If you look at it here in this diagram, in the integral model, it's shown quite well through the lines. So you see these concentric lines, these circles going round and round. Those would be the levels of consciousness. So you're in the domain of consciousness. This whole model is in the domain of consciousness. Yeah. But within the domain of consciousness, you have the subjective I, the true self or the Christ, and its perceptions can come in and start to change this. And you can start to get miraculous effects happening in the objective world outside of you, which then feed back and tell you, okay, this is working. This is another idea. Actually, maybe what you perceived before isn't the truth. And as you start to let go of your old misperceptions and your old identity, you go up the levels. And so you expand your consciousness, but you're still in the domain of consciousness, now moving, however, in the right direction. You're moving up and out of it to ultimately, beyond all the levels, lies spirit, lies pure formless awareness that is beyond levels and doesn't have levels and domains and none of these models and these opposites seem to exist. There is no subjective and objective or we and its, or individual and collective, or interior and exterior in spirit. It just is. But to get there requires going through these levels. You're unlikely to start at a very body identified level, believing that you're just a body, and then suddenly go into pure formless awareness of perfect love. It's more, okay, well, maybe I need to start thinking that I'm a mind. I'm not really a body. I'm actually more mind than body. And that's a whole journey. That can take years to start getting your mind around that. I'm more mind than body. And then you move into, well, what about, the eternal mind, the soul, you might call it, or the spirit, as we call it, that transcends just the ego mind. So I'm the mind, but this mind, the ego mind, just thinking about all my problems and issues as a separate self, isn't very happy. So that's not freedom either. But it's a step in the right direction, you understand? Because you're moving away from body identification at the very base to mind, then to soul. This is where the idea of soul comes in, but ultimately you go to spirit, which is pure awareness beyond all the levels. And that's the journey. The spiritual journey is moving away from that very limited identification with body to more identifying with the mind. And then the mind, as the eternal mind, becomes the Christ mind or the spirit. And you start moving up and raising your consciousness up and out and away from the domain of separation, which is the domain of the ego, the domain of consciousness. This is all the egoic structure. But within it, you can escape it by listening to the Holy Spirit or the remembrance of perfect love that comes in. These are the blue arrows that comes in and reinterprets it. It says, oh, actually, you don't have to perceive it from the perspective of consciousness, of the separate belief in separation and the separate self anymore. You can have another perception. And then you raise your consciousness when you do that. When you change your mind and you let go of the old perceptions and the old self, then you raise your consciousness until eventually you'll get to the point where you realize that even this is an illusion. You realize that there's really only one ego mind or consciousness. Even that is just an illusion. It's a dream. Therefore, the idea of separation that is behind it is a dream. And really, there's only pure formless awareness of perfect love, which has no levels and no distinctions and no variations at all. And then you're home. But you've had to climb up out the levels, raise your consciousness, eventually let go of the idea of consciousness entirely. Say, well, that doesn't even exist. If separation isn't true, then there is no separate consciousness. It doesn't even exist. And then everything, all of its projections, all of its miscreations disappear as well, because they must. If consciousness doesn't exist, then neither can its creation, its miscreation, which is the world. And then the world disappears. Hence, the disappearance of the universe, which is the title of Gary Renaud's first book about exactly this. Okay, so does that make sense? It's a bit of a recap. We've been through this stuff before.
Yeah.
But
always good to have a reminder.
Yeah. And if someone talks about consciousness, that can be a starting point for quite an interesting conversation. They're open to it. You say, okay, so what do you understand by consciousness? Oh, well, it's, consciousness is the same as God. Consciousness is universal. Consciousness is the ultimate force or power in the universe. And you could say, well, maybe what if it's not? What if there's something beyond consciousness? Oh, okay. So then, if they're open, maybe you got their attention. Okay, so what is beyond consciousness then? Well, what about, and then we use different language. What about awareness? What if there was a pure formless awareness beyond the consciousness of separation that created the entire universe? What if that's the truth? Because where did consciousness come from? This is the question that science can't really answer. Say, okay, well, now there's this consciousness and it appears to be in bodies and in brains, but we actually have no idea where it really came from. They say, well, consciousness comes from the brain. Well, that doesn't make sense, because then what created the body and the brain? Where does those come from? Oh, no, they just randomly came about. What? So there's no consciousness behind them? There's no kind of intelligence behind them? That doesn't make any sense. It can't. They can't just have come about in a void, and then consciousness comes from the brain. But then what created the brain and the body? It's a big problem with the scientific materialist paradigms. Like, they can't answer this question. They call it the consciousness problem and the brain-mind problem. You can't really answer that question unless you go to something transcendent. You have to go, well, maybe there's something outside of the body and the brain, and maybe there is a pre-existing consciousness that's sort of some universal consciousness. And this is what many religions do, but even they don't have the full answer, because that consciousness is still an illusion. That consciousness is false, because it's based on a false idea of separation from your true awareness, and then it made up a whole load of false people, events, circumstances, entire seeming reality of time and space to now project itself onto and and give itself a reality and a meaning that it doesn't have. And this is what the Course is saying. So a non-dual teaching challenges all of this and says, it's important you realize that, there's this universal consciousness, apparently, we call the ego. That's a step in the right direction. But you have to realize that it's false. And therefore that you can let go of it and open your mind to the truth, which is just pure formless awareness of perfect love, that pre-existed consciousness. Because there must have been something from which the thoughts of separation split off. It didn't just come from a void. There's something, but it's not a thing. We call it the void or the emptiness, but it's because it's not a thing. It's no thing, but there is something, some presence, let's call it presence or awareness there, that must have preceded the idea of separation, yeah? Because there must have been some awareness there to then, now the awareness, the mind then loses its way and says, oh, okay, now I want to believe in separation. And I'm going to deny this awareness. But that awareness must have been there to start with, to deny. Do you get it? So logically, if you look at this construct, it's the only thing that makes sense as to how this all came about. Okay, there must have been a pre-existing awareness from which the mind then split off, and I decided on separation, then goes down this whole track, creates this whole dream world. But that awareness from which it departed in the idea of separation is still there. It must still be there. It can't have gone anywhere. And that's the eternal. That's the eternal, unchanging awareness that all the great teachers and teachings point us to. So go find that. And if you find that in yourself, then you know who you are. This is know thyself. And then you also know that this isn't who you are. You have to then contrast that with the illusion and say, well, I can't be the ego, consciousness, belief in separation and a separate self caught up in time and space, and also be this pure awareness, because the one denies the other. I have to make a clear choice here. And this teaching is saying, well, make the choice for spirit over the ego, and if you keep doing that, that's forgiveness or letting go, and you will ultimately come back into this awareness, which you never really left. You've just been in a dream that you left. This whole consciousness is just a nightmare of a separate self and its dream world, which hasn't even really happened. You just got caught up in a dream. And this awareness still, is still there, still available and accessible, but you have to let go of the dream in order to become aware of it, which is where the letting go comes in, and the reinterpretation of the Holy Spirit comes in with the blue arrows. And that's how now, within the domain of consciousness, you can hear another voice. And that other voice can help you to climb up out of consciousness through the levels to eventually get to the point where you say, I get it. I understand this is all false. Doesn't even exist. And I'm rooted in my true awareness, and that, that's my default awareness, which is what this non-dual path of awakening and letting go is all about doing, to restore your mind to God or pure formless awareness of perfect love. You must collapse this idea entirely. Consciousness must disappear in order for you to be fully identified with God or pure formless awareness of perfect love. Does that make sense? That's one or the other. You can't fudge it. Most teachings try and fudge it. Well, you can have a little bit of awareness or God, that's fine, but you're also going to have the consciousness of separation and the world, and both realities are real. Most teachings, dualistic teachings, say, well, you can maintain this and this world is real, but then there's also the spirit realm, and they kind of coexist happily, and you can kind of somehow make that compromise work. And of course, in miracles and other non-dual teachings like Advaita Vedanta are saying, no, you can't. You can't make an illusion and the truth true, because they contradict each other. You have to choose. Fortunately, so then you have a simple choice to make. Okay, well, there's clearly a way out. I just have to choose this over that, meaning I have to let go of all of this and just accept that. Okay, that's very clear. I understand what I have to do, and I understand how I do it. I have to let go of my negative thoughts and emotions that are triggered by all of the stuff I've invented. And then I'm reinterpreting and I'm deciding for pure formless awareness of perfect love in that moment. And if I keep doing that, eventually I will identify only with this, and my identification with this will have been broken and completely undone. And when there's no more identification with this, then the entire world, the universe of thought, separation, form, duality, etc., will just collapse. It'll just disappear because the idea behind it is no longer there. And at that point, I leave the body, I leave the world, and I never come back because I'm quite content in this true reality, in God, in pure formless oneness of perfect love. And I'm happy to remain there forever, for all eternity.
Mm.
So it's very simple, but very few people understand this. This is still considered a radical teaching. Most people are trying to make this real. And they're saying, well, within this construct, what can you do to make it better? How can you be a better separate self?
Yeah,
I've just
we've
been
all
doing
done.
research on, other people in the space of personal growth, and what they're all teaching is how do you become a better separate self?
We've all been there, yes.
And that's not going to work because the separate self is illusory, it's false. The separate self will ultimately always lead to pain, suffering, misery, and death. It's inevitable. So there's no hope within the ego system. You can't find a way out of the ego system of consciousness by staying bound to that consciousness. You have to go beyond that consciousness into pure awareness, which is what the Course is saying. And that is a radical shift because all of this has to go. Then none of it's true. None of it's real. It all has to disappear. You have to let go of all of it without exception. And that's where we struggle. That's where the difficulty comes in. Got to let go of all of it, but I'm still attached to things in the world. I still think I love things, humans, animals. I still have fear about what's going to happen to them or what's going to happen to me. I'm still identified with my separate self. I still have body issues, and so it goes. I'm still really identified with the separate self and the ego consciousness. And that's what I have to undo, and that's the purpose of my life. That's the only function in the dream, which is forgiveness or letting go.
Yeah.
So very, very simple. When you break it down like this, people say A Course in Miracles is complicated. It's not really. It's very, very simple. But it requires the willingness to question everything that you've believed up to this point. As you said, this course requires that you must question every single value that you hold. Well, that's quite radical for most people. They don't want to question every single value they hold.
No.
They want to carry on believing in most of the values and kind of graft on a bit of, well, I have a little bit of that, a little bit of spirituality would be nice. It'll make me feel better. It'll upgrade my miserable separate self out of the victim to someone who can maybe cope better with life. But do I really want to let go of the idea that I'm a separate self and the idea that I'm human? That's the question, and most people don't. They try and make the human self work better. And Jesus is saying that's a delusional approach. That's never going to work. And we only have to look 50 years in the future and go, well, I'm probably going to be dead, right? You're in the second half of your life, you're probably going to be dead. So what then is the point of trying to build that separate self up and glorify it and make it into something that you think is going to work when it's going to die inevitably? So death can be our greatest teacher in this, to say, well, clearly the ego doesn't work because it always dies. So it cannot be permanent or eternal. How can I believe in that? I can't. I've got to look elsewhere. I've got to look to the eternal awareness beyond the idea of separation and death for my salvation. And then you start just letting go of this and saying, no, this isn't who I am. This isn't what I want. I'm willing to accept this teaching. I'm willing to accept that I am just pure formless awareness of perfect love and nothing else. End of. There can be no exceptions. The moment I make one exception, I say, well, I'm this, but I'm also a little bit of the separate self. You've split your mind, haven't you?
Mm. Yeah.
And you can't reconcile these warring parts of your mind as hard as you try. And the ego tries and tries and tries, but it's never going to succeed because it can never reconcile with spirit. The only way out is to drop the ego and the consciousness that keeps you seemingly separate in your mind from pure formless awareness of perfect love. That's the only way, which is why forgiveness or letting go is the answer. So very, very simple. The metaphysics are simple. Then the methodology is simple. The methodology of letting go, forgiveness, comes out of the metaphysics once you understand it clearly. Then it makes complete sense. To the ego, it's never going to make sense. The ego is never going to make sense of it because the ego says, I'm it. I'm the big cheese. This is it. I am reality. Don't look outside of me. So it's never going to make sense of another awareness because it doesn't want to know that awareness. In fact, its whole existence is predicated on the denial of this awareness. It only exists because it's denied this awareness. Do you see the problem?
Mm-hmm.
So it can never accept this awareness back because that's the end of it, which is why it has to be one or the other. Okay. So a nice recap of the metaphysics and the theory. If you want to go more into it, listen to the discussion where we went into it into this kind of detail. But I've just kind of unpacked it, I think, quite well, I hope. Does that make sense, Elaine?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well explained.
So that's too abstract. And so watch this inspiring interview. How our beliefs, perceptions, and words shape our reality. Start your day. So how does this actually apply in practice? You start changing the way you believe, you perceive your words, and that's where the rubber meets the road. The metaphysics are one thing, and you're like, okay, but how do I actually get out of it? I get out of it by reinterpreting whatever seems to be happening in my reality, just moment by moment, by systematically shifting my thoughts, my emotions, by letting go of those ones that are not helpful. I reprogram myself, and I start journeying back to this awareness through the reinterpretation of the dream. So every time I do a reinterpretation, that's what's called a correction or a miracle. And that's another little step taken towards pure formless awareness. That's what he's saying. Just keep taking these steps, keep making these corrections, and you cannot fail eventually to get back here because that's all there really is. When you've undone everything else, that's what will remain because that's the truth. So for most people, the realization that they're really unlimited consciousness, as Marisa calls it, or spirit, as Yeshua refers to it, doesn't happen overnight, as it did for Eckhart Tolle. But it happens gradually as they start to practice changing their attitude and shifting their perceptions moment by moment. Right? Sometimes it can happen, as with Eckhart and, say, Byron Katie, just overnight, bang, they wake up. But it was 29 years it took him to be ready for that. It's 29 years of suffering. He wasn't a happy child. He'd never been happy, and his unhappiness just got more and more acute until in his late 20s. He's like, I can't stand it. He said one night lying in bed, I cannot stand myself anymore. And then he thought, well, hang on, maybe there's two selves here. Maybe there's an I and another self, the myself that I cannot stand. And maybe there's two selves. And that kind of made him see the splits in his mind. And then, he had this intense realization, passed out, woke up the next morning, and his ego had kind of collapsed in on itself. It had just disappeared. And he was left in pure awareness. But then he took years to understand what had happened and integrate it, and then became a teacher, and then wrote The Power of Now. And, it was a whole journey to make sense of that. So his journey didn't stop then. He then needed to frame it and understand it, and that took him years. So yeah, just keep practicing the exercise and the techniques daily, because every time you do that, you're saying, I'm open to unlimited consciousness. I'm open to pure awareness. So Marisa Peer calls it unlimited consciousness. We would call this pure formless awareness. It's unlimited because it's formless. But be careful of this. Just all I'm saying is use the correct terminology.
Mm.
Consciousness in course terms is not the same as pure awareness.
Mm. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, just some of those exercises you did them in a past year, so we won't dwell on that. So here we talk about your flop, how to let it go. You want to go back into that. So very briefly, your flop is your fundamental life operating program, right? So that is your separate self concept that says, I am this, I am a separate self, and I define myself as such. And everyone has a variation on that theme. Some people are more identified with being a victim. Others are more, well, I want to be the grandiose self. I want to, you know, big up my separate self, and I want to be successful and the man or woman of our town, and I want to make money, and you know, I need to create a concept that is now better. So that's another form of ego, another flop, because ultimately that operating program will fail you because it's not true. It may seem to succeed for a while, but in the end, you'll come across pain and suffering and disappointment and failure and ultimately death. And you'll go, well, what is the point then? You know, I'm doing all this stuff and I'm trying to grow and become this, you know, amazing person and succeed. But in the end, you know, it's all going to fail anyway because I'm going to die, and everyone dies, and there's still pain and suffering and misery in the world. So you know, what is this really the answer? So a lot of celebrities come to the realization that no, it's not actually the answer. This is what Marisa Peer talks about. It isn't the answer because I've done all of that and it hasn't really fulfilled me, and I'm still not happy or peaceful. And then they have the opportunity to let that go. And that's when they would really start to awaken spiritually, because then they're letting go of the illusion that the ego can somehow work for them and give them something they want. And they've had to go through the journey of going and following its guidance and doing everything it said and succeeding in its eyes, and then going, but it's not really success because I don't feel happy or fulfilled or peaceful. So, you know, what now? And then usually there's a period of despair, but if they go to someone like Marisa for help, she'll try and help them to see that actually they are this unlimited being. They are pure formless awareness, and they are beyond all that. But that is not who they are at all. They're just to start accepting the enoughness, the abundance of their true identity. You know, I am enough. She gives them that affirmation. She says, you know, I am enough. Say that over and over and over to yourself, because that starts correcting the misperception of the person in their mind, in their own mind, of their flop, their false life operating program, and starts to let it go. Yeah. So that's what we're doing here. Through the letting go, we're changing our perception. We are undoing the flop, which is the false self-concept. The false self-concept keeps us bound up in the belief that we really are a separate self. All of this stuff is real, and that the ego, the consciousness, the belief in separation that is necessary for our separate self is real. And it keeps us, the separate self is tied to this consciousness or belief in separation. Right? You can't have a separate self if you don't have a separate consciousness. Because in pure formless awareness, there's no separate self. There's only one self. Okay, does that make sense? So you see how it all ties together.
Mm.
So it's actually a very logical, simple, but just radical. So now it's going to take you a whole lot of time to figure it out and really understand it and accept it. And conceptually understanding is one thing, but accepting it is another. Saying, okay, I accept that I'm not human. I accept that I'm not an individual self. I accept that I'm in a dream world. None of this means anything, that I'm ultimately just going to awaken into this awareness, and my separate self and this entire experience of a separate self is just going to disappear. It's going to go. And the spirit rejoices at that and says, hallelujah, finally, hell is it's just going to disappear. And you can just return your mind to heaven, which is your natural state and home. And the ego says, that's terrible. That's terrifying. That's the end of my dream. That's the end of my identity, my dream world. This can't happen. I've got to hold on. I've got to cling to that, for dear life, because without this false belief, it has no life. It has no existence. Does that make sense? I think you
Yes.
mentioned it.
Yeah. Oh, yes, yes. Mhm.
Alrighty, so let's have a look at today's lesson. That's good preparation for the lesson, which is all about thoughts. It's the first thought lesson in the course. So how much time do we have? About 40 minutes. It's fine. We'll do the lesson. Okay, so this is lesson number 4. If you want to read that in its key idea.
Yeah. These thoughts do not mean anything. They are like the things I see in this room or place. Lesson 4.
These thoughts do not mean anything. So you look at your thoughts and you go, they don't mean anything. That's pretty radical.
It
So I
is.
might be thinking about the past. I might be thinking about the future. I might be thinking about all kinds of things, right? We think
Oh, yeah.
about people, places, things, events, objects, situations. We have hundreds, maybe thousands of these thoughts a day. And this is just saying they don't mean anything. Okay, then. They are like the things I see. So quite an important lesson, because he's relating it to the external world. Okay, so the internal is here. Let's go back to the integral model. Have a look at this. Shows it. So these thoughts do not mean anything. This is in the individual interior, upper left quadrant in the integral model, the I. These thoughts don't mean anything. Okay, so I'm talking about my thoughts, perceptions or thoughts, a state of mind. Doesn't mean anything. And now in the second part of the idea, second sentence, he relates it to the external world. And he says, they are like the things I see in this place, in this room, wherever I am. And so now we're in the external, it's the body and its senses, sight being one of them, and I, separate self body, am seeing all the stuff around me. And so just in the same way that my thoughts are meaningless, so is what they show me. So he's making a connection, the first connection between these two realms. Up to now, it's been nothing I see means anything. Okay, so I'm just talking about here, and it doesn't mean anything. Now he's saying, well, go within, perceive your thoughts and realize they don't mean anything, and understand that it's exactly the same as what's going on here. That what I see doesn't mean anything. Why? Because this that's meaningless created this, that then must also be meaningless because it was created by the meaningless, logically. So he's making that explicit that connection explicit here in the second sentence. They are like the things I see. So my thoughts are like the things I see. Now that's quite a simple idea, but it's quite radical. This is revolutionary. I mean, there goes Newtonian physics. Newtonian physics says, no, this is what's real, and your thoughts are independent of this. They have no bearing on reality. This is saying, oh, no, they absolutely do. These domains are integrally connected. This one, in fact, creates this one. The interior I, subjective self, and the we intersubjective create the seemingly objective reality of the world. And then it comes back, feeds back to the mind and it says, well, this must be real. Because look, you've had this experience. So quite a profound lesson. These first 7 lessons are really, really profound. And as I've said before, I do them every day because they contain the essence of the entire teaching. If you understand these lessons and you apply them, then you're applying the teachings. You don't actually need any others if you fully understand and apply them. But when we start, we do need others because we won't fully understand and apply them. The others give us context and we come back to them. And I love doing these early lessons again because you come back and you go, but I'm not bored of them. In fact, I just see a deeper meaning in them. I see how profound they are.
It's true.
You can never really get bored of them because it's just like, well, how deep do you want to go into your own mind and your own understanding? And these lessons take you, this lesson takes you all the way home. These thoughts don't mean anything. Neither does the place outside of you. Okay, none of it means anything. Well, if none of it means anything, then it can't be real. Then what's real must be beyond it, or beyond thought and beyond the projections of thought. That's what he's saying, lies home. That's where this idea points you, is back to pure awareness that's outside of this model, that's beyond it in the blue box in this diagram, in pure formless awareness. Okay, so let's read this. There's a bit to read.
Unlike the preceding ones, these exercises do not begin with the idea for the day. In these practice periods, being with nothing, the thoughts that are crossing your mind for about a minute. Then apply the idea to them. If you are already aware of unhappy thoughts, use them as subjects for the idea. Do not, however, select only the thoughts you think are bad. You will find if you train yourself to look at your thoughts that they represent such a mixture that in a sense none of them can be called good or bad. That is why they do not mean anything.
Okay, so what's he saying here?
Just saying, watch our thoughts for a minute, and just doesn't matter what it is, good or bad, because at the end of the day, they mean nothing. They're all the same. Then,
So this is the Holy Spirit's judgment on it. It's not, okay, this one's good, this one's bad. No, if it's a dualistic thought, they're all illusory. The only kind of thought that is real is thoughts of non-duality, thoughts of pure awareness, which you could argue aren't even really thoughts, but there's awareness there. If you go into an awareness and it just feels really peaceful and comforting, well, there's thought, but it's not I, subject, am thinking about this object. It's not subject, object, dualistic thought. That's the ego's thought. It's more just an awareness of, well, I rest in this being, and it can be very, very peaceful and very pleasant. But as soon as I bring in duality and I'm thinking, well, what about this? And what about this situation? Then I'm in illusion again. And you notice how you vacillate. So you can go into that space for a bit and you can go, oh, that feels really nice. No thoughts, just peaceful. And then you, as soon as you start thinking about it, you're back in.
A thought, yes, there's a thought, yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah. I'm feeling really peaceful. Oh, how long is that going to last? Oh, but what do you have to do?
Yeah.
You've got to get up and feed.
You've lost it then, yeah.
You've lost it, yeah. Then you're back in thought.
Do it many, many times, yes.
That's how it works. But if you can just zoom out of the thought with a high level thought like this, these thoughts don't mean anything. I mean, you could apply this day in, day out, every day. This could be your mantra, couldn't it? You could just live by this. Okay, this thought doesn't mean anything. I'm thinking again. Doesn't really mean anything. I'm getting upset by this thought. It doesn't mean anything, just like the things I see and I perceive. I keep it to see, but you could extend this to perceiving. They're like the things I perceive. in this room. I just keep it as seeing because it's start, let's just start with the visual sense to start with, and then it starts expanding in the later lessons to incorporate all of your sense perceptions. But it applies to perception as well. I like the things I perceive in this room. You apply this idea, it's profound awakening. You're going to wake up to who you are. You can do nothing else. Because none of my thoughts mean anything. And what they're projecting doesn't mean anything either. All the meaning that I've given these things doesn't really mean anything because it's all just false thoughts. You see how the two are related. Okay, no.
Yes.
So just let all that go.
Yeah, it's a good self-inquiry question, that, yeah.
Well, what?
That these thoughts do not mean anything.
Yeah.
You know, you
can
can't
turn
answer.
it into a question and say, does this really mean anything? Does this thoughts about
self-inquiry
really mean anything? No, it doesn't really. Okay, well, why am I making it mean something then? Why am I giving it a meaning and then suffering because of that meaning that I've given it? That doesn't make any sense. Let me just let go of the meaning I've given it. Now you're really starting to get somewhere, aren't you? So now, okay, you're getting to the real crux of the matter, is that you've given everything the meaning that it has for you. That was lesson 2. So it doesn't really mean anything. Just see it that it doesn't have meaning, and you can't get upset by it anymore. You'll just let it go. But it starts. This is why the first few lessons focus so much on meaning. It focuses on the meaning because he knows that that meaning is everything. If you give your thoughts a meaning, they will be meaningful and real to you. And then you will suffer because of them, because that's the meaning you've given them. The only way out of it is to deny that meaning. Completely. You can't say, well, that thought means something and this one doesn't really mean anything. It's like anything in the domain of duality. I'm thinking about the world, about my problems, about anything, even if it's nostalgia about the past. You go, well, why is that bad? It's still just part of a false illusory construct. As he says, the thoughts that can be called good or bad are equally illusory. So maybe you go down memory lane, you go, oh, that's really nice. I remember 20 years ago, it was so nice. Had some great times with family or friends or whatever, or on a holiday. And you go, oh, well, that's not bad. But it's illusory. It's not true, right? You're dreaming again.
Yeah.
So you have to see it for what it is and then be willing to say, okay, no, those thoughts don't mean anything either, even though they're more pleasant than, say, the ego's obviously unpleasant ones. Oh, I'm really stressing because, I'm in fear about, some, like, well, I'm not gonna be able to sustain myself financially in the future. So that's a common fear. And the anxiety comes up and okay, so that's obviously bad and unpleasant. But the nostalgia about the oh, but it was so nice. Remember those good old days. And then you go, well, I'll escape to the nostalgia, but you're not escaping. You're still in the domain of duality. And because you're still there, then those fear thoughts come in and they mean something to you because it all means something or it all means nothing. That's the equation here.
Yeah,
it's all meaningful or it's all meaningless. That's what the course is trying to teach us. If you want to pick and choose, say, oh, well, this has a meaning, but this doesn't. This is good, this is bad. You're caught up in the game. You're in duality and there's no clarity there. You'll never find the clarity that leads to the peace of God that surpasses understanding. You're just caught up in a very mixed bag of duality. And, it's going to be, sometimes it'll be okay. And other times it really won't. And you're going to suffer. You're going to be, on the roller coaster ride, up and down. So he's saying to us, and early on in the course, just let all that go and realize that none of them are good or bad. They're just not real. And then he's saying, don't be specific. Don't be afraid to use good thoughts as well as bad.
To let all of them go.
None of them represents your real thoughts, which are being covered up by them. The good ones are but shadows of what lies beyond, and shadows make sight difficult. The bad ones are blocks to sight and make seeing impossible. You do not want either. Okay, so the good ones, let's say, oh, yeah, I'm having a nice thought about the weather today. It's very happy, nice weather. Or I'm thinking nice thoughts about the past. Oh, it was so great because I did this in the past. I met my friend for coffee the other day. It was really good to catch up. Whatever it is, it's still a shadow of what lies beyond. Yeah, the shadows make sight difficult.
So it's difficult when I mean, things like having a nice coffee with a friend's a bit more sort of neutral, isn't it? But if it's something like my dog, obviously we've had some nostalgia
Hmm.
because we know time's coming to close, and the time when she has to go, there's no
Yeah.
doubt there's grief. There's going to be grief. Well, it doesn't have to be, of course not, but there's an extreme of the ego where,
Yeah.
there's a loving relationship in the good times, and now
Yeah.
it's coming to a close.
Think about, but if you think about that and you dwell on that, then the grief is going to be greater.
Yeah.
And so he's saying, well, these are just two sides of the same coin. You think
Hmm.
the good ones are gonna help you and are gonna work, you can escape to them, but you're still in duality. You're still,
Mm. Yeah.
caught between heads and tails. What might be good, might be bad. It's a very mixed bag. And how can you find the peace of God that surpasses all understanding, that is eternal, that's permanent, that's unchanging in that? Oh, now it's good, now it's bad, now it changes again.
Which
And
is,
it's a very bag, it's 50-50. You're not
yeah.
going to find it this way. That's what he's saying here.
Yeah, which again is easier to do in a more neutral, pleasant, had a nice day with my friend, blah blah blah, and it's much easier. But it's when it's the more like that you're losing your love, or all of these
Yeah,
things, or financial. That's a big one for
yeah,
people. They've lost their jobs, so how are they going to survive? So those are
yeah,
the big ones. That's
yeah. And,
that's
and, and, and what Jesus is saying is none of them are really big or small. They're all illusory, right?
right.
They're all the
Yes,
same. So don't make it into something bigger and more
of
important than
course.
something else. Same, because you're in a dream, right? A dream
Yeah.
is a dream is a dream.
Mm.
So whether you're dreaming, think about your sleeping dreams. Whether it's a nightmare and you just say, oh my God, this is horrific, and it's people are
Mm.
dying or I'm dying, and blood and gore and suffering, and proper nightmare. Or you're dreaming, oh well, I'm having a really pleasant time in my dream and I'm walking around, and maybe I'm having a very good experience. It's still a dream. None of
Mm-hmm.
it's real. That's what
Oh
he's
yeah.
saying to us. Just awaken from it and realize that none of it's real, that actually all you've got to do is wake up. This
Mm.
is why the shadows of the good dreams are not helpful in awakening, because they make you believe in the reality of the dream and of the dreamer that's dreaming the dream, rather than just going, but none of that's true. Just wake up.
Mm.
The dream isn't real. Wake up out of the dream. So as he says, it's a major exercise. You want to read number 3?
Yeah. This is a major exercise and will be repeated from time to time in somewhat different form. The aim here is to train you in the first steps toward the goal of separating the meaningless from the meaningful. It is a first attempt in the long range purpose of learning to see the meaningless as outside you and the meaningful within. It is also the beginning of training your mind to recognize what is the same and what is different. What is the same and what is different? Sorry, what does it mean by that? What is the same and what is different?
Yeah.
It is awesome.
Yeah. So the meaningless is outside you and the meaningful is within.
Oh
Yes. The
yeah, yeah.
meaningless
Mm,
meaningless is the dream world. The meaningless is the illusion of a separate self. Everything in the exterior world is ultimately meaningless. And what is really meaningful is within. This is your true self. This is your true awareness that leads to states of being like peace and love and joy. That's truly meaningful. And none of this means anything. Okay. So then he says, and you need to make the distinction between them. training your mind to recognize what is the same and what is different, right? So if you get confused between these, then you're never going to be able to make a choice. If you think it's all one, so this is where God created it all and God's responsible for all of this, the illusion and the truth, you get horribly confused. How do you choose? Okay, so God then also created pain and fear and sickness and suffering and death. So they're equally valid to happy things, happiness, love, peace, joy. Both are created by God because God created everything. So how do I choose between them if they're all created by God? What's your basis for decision then? They're both real. That's what he's saying. So then in that confused view where you're making God real, God responsible for this, then duality is real. And you say, God created all of this. So it's equally valid to go and stab someone to death, murder someone, because that's part of God, as it is to go and love them and hug them and help them. Yeah, you would have no basis for choice then because all of it's God. So, and the dark is as valid as the light. Some teachers and teachings teach this. Well, it's all God, it's all good, dark and light, it's all part of God. And it's, we've got to accept it all and embrace it all. Okay, so would you embrace all that pain and suffering and fear? No. You look at it, you have to be aware of it, but then you got to let it go. If you embrace it, how can you also then embrace truth and love and peace and joy when you've got all this pain and suffering and misery going on in your mind? There's a clear contradiction. So this is the only teaching that makes any sense. It's the only way out. You try and fudge it and you try and make both of these realities real, you just end up with a mess. And there's no clarity, and then you don't actually go anywhere. You just spin around in the ego's world, which is exactly what it wants. Just keep cycling around, confused, not knowing who you are, trying to find an answer in the dream. You get older, you suffer, and you die. And then you haven't woken, so guess what? You reincarnate, you come back, and you're back in the same cycle, go back into the tumble dryer, get another shake up. You haven't really learned anything and do it all over again. And at some point we go, I'm really tired of that. There's a part of our mind that knows that that's not reality, that that's not ultimate truth. That's pain and suffering, and we want out. And that's when a teaching like this will start to resonate. And if you're not there yet, then it won't resonate. You'll still try and find some hope in the world. You'll still try and find, no, I think I can still find meaning in the world and meaning in my life as a human being. And that's what most people are looking for. Personal growth is really about the persona becoming a better persona. I, separate self, and now I'm going to become a better version of that separate self, and therein lies my salvation. That's going to free me. But it won't. You're still going to die. Okay, so that brings us to the practice. Shall we do this as a little meditation?
Yeah.
Close the session. I'll guide you through it, and we'll end the session there.
Yeah.
But really, I mean, just we've done these lessons twice now.
Yes,
Three
yeah, but it's still
and it's like fresh.
It is.
Well, still so much, to get from the early lessons. So although they're the foundation and they're basic, it's not like, oh, well, I got those, those are really basic. I don't need to go back there. No.
Yeah,
you really do.
It's a life journey, really.
You're still making your thoughts mean something.
Oh,
and you're
yes.
still making the world mean something.
Yeah.
And there lies the problem.
Like I say, with myself, there's sort of general stuff that I used to get upset about. I'm a little bit, I can clear it quicker. But yeah, I've still got like sticky ones, like the love of my dog. Yeah, that's still there. So I still need to practice. Yeah.
So when those thoughts come up, just remind yourself, that doesn't really mean anything alone. The nostalgia, thinking about all the good times, the happy times, it doesn't it doesn't mean anything because it's just a dream.
Mm. Yeah.
And so the dream's now fading, but that doesn't mean anything either. You see,
Mm. Yeah.
the dream never meant anything to you, then there's no sadness when the dream fades because you didn't give it a meaning and an
Mm.
importance. But if you give it meaning and importance, then when the dream fades, as all dreams will, then you're going to suffer because you go, oh, the dream's ending. And now there's a part of me that's ending. Yeah. The Elaine that was younger 10 years ago with your dog, or that Elaine is gone. No more. That Elaine was never actually real.
That's right. Yes, it's just, obviously maybe, who knows which form's going to go, mine or hers, but at the moment hers seems the probability. So that little that's gone, whereas this form's still in
Yeah.
existence.
Yeah, but are you identified with the form? That's the only problem.
Well,
Right?
that's the problem. Yes, exactly.
Identification with the form. The body isn't a problem. The Elaine identity, not a problem. If you don't identify with it and her,
Yeah.
that's the problem.
Hmm.
And you identify with it when you go, oh, but now I'm really sad. Elaine is sad because my dog's died. And that's, I really love my dog and she was a big part of my life. And the Elaine character feels bereft, feels like Elaine has lost something of value.
Yeah, that's true.
And then you
Yes.
suffer. But if none of that means anything, see, this is why you've got to go and you've got to question the good thoughts as well, because it doesn't mean anything. It
Of
was
course.
just a dream.
Of
You were
course.
dreaming a dream of being a separate character with a dog, and all those experiences happened in a dream and nothing more and nothing less.
Mm.
So the dream isn't true. It was never real. So now the dream is fading. Well, that's not true either. It wasn't true in its glory days, in the summer of it, and it's not true in the winter of it either.
Mm.
Right? None of it means anything. That's the only way out of the inevitable
True,
shifting and changing
yes.
of the world.
Because there'll be
Because if you
always
make
something
that
will grab
real,
you.
you're going to
Yeah,
suffer. Because
yeah,
everything comes to an end here.
it
And
does.
what's
Yeah,
good, what was once good will no longer be good. It's not going to last forever.
yeah.
And then you'll struggle and you'll suffer because you're attached to it. And that's the identification with the separate self.
Hmm. Yeah,
That you have to start questioning it at its roots. So when any of those thoughts come up, just say, no, they don't mean anything.
yeah.
That's the forgiveness. Just doesn't mean anything. So I'm not happy. I'm not sad. It just doesn't mean anything. I'm just equanimous.
Hmm.
I'm unmoved. I'm unshaken. And the ego says, oh, that's really boring. You're not feeling anything. You've got to feel the pain.
Hmm.
Feel the grief, Elaine. Feel the pain. No, that's good to feel. At least you're alive because you're feeling.
Mm. Yeah.
But it's not. It's a living death.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
These are not real feelings. They're not authentic. They're not real. It's just an illusion that you're living in. That feeling of underlying peace that surpasses all understanding, that tranquility, that's the only feeling that's true. And you won't get that from the dualistic thought of the ego. It's designed to disturb that all the time and cover that over. All right, so let's practice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so let's do a meditation. Just do a meditation on the lesson 4. So take you into it. We'll do the exercise while we're in a bit of a deeper state. So close your eyes, feet shoulder width apart, keep your back straight, your hands in your lap. Take a nice deep breath in through the nose, noticing how the stomach rises and the chest rises and the subtle flow of air in through the nostrils. Clenching the sphincter muscle to lock the energy in, pulling the energy up the spine. Just pausing at the top of the inhale. Scan your mind. Notice any thoughts going on there. This lesson is all about thoughts. Just breathe in. This deep inhale to create some spacious awareness within which you can now observe the thought. Whatever thoughts are there, just observe them and remind yourself that this thought about whatever it is, whoever it is, doesn't mean anything. It's meaningless, doesn't mean anything. It's like the things that I see in this room. So you can briefly open your eyes, look around. Go, it is like the things I see in this room. So my thoughts are as illusory as the things I see. None of it really means anything. And just let it go. Exhale out through your mouth. Have a sense of just blowing this thought away. It helps you can visualize it as a dark cloud or a black smoke. It's leaving you. Going, gone. Pull the lower stomach into the spine. Expel the last remaining air out. And you rest in relative peace and stillness. Breathing in again. Nice deep breath in. So if you recognize any thoughts as harmful, anything that's obviously negative, harmful, bring that to mind. And as you breathe in, inviting the spacious awareness of spirit in, remind yourself that this thought about whatever it is, whoever it is, doesn't mean anything. Does not mean anything. Tell yourself that. Again, open your eyes as you look around. Say, it is like the things I see in this room. It's like the things I see. None of it really means anything. So why am I upset about it if it doesn't mean anything? Again, exhale out through the mouth. Just let it all go. The breeze of your breath, blowing it all away to the nothingness that it really is. A dark cloud or black smoke, leaving you. It's going, gone. Expel the last remaining air out, along with all the negativity. That thought is gone. It was never real. What is a thought? Is there any substance to it? Does it have any absolute reality or meaning? No, it's conjured up by a mind that isn't even real, by an idea of separation isn't even real. It conjures it all up. It's a game of make and believe and make. We project all this out and we make up a world based on all these false thoughts. It's like the things I see. As you open your eyes around, so just repeat the idea that these thoughts do not mean anything. I like the things I see in this room. Say that with clarity and conviction aloud if you like. It's an affirmation. These thoughts do not mean anything. They're like the things I see in this room. And just rest in this clarity. Just rest in this being. Nowhere else to go, there's nothing else to do, nothing else to think about. Breathe, relax, and be still. A couple of minutes of deep silence. I'm just gently coming back. This deep connected state. And bring your mind back into an awareness of the body and the breath, senses and the world. And on the count of 3, you're going to open your eyes. So 1, just breathing in, noticing how the stomach rises and the chest rises. A subtle flow of air in through the nostrils. Pausing at the top of the inhale. Smile, scan your mind. Noticing, again, any thoughts going on. Random thoughts, good thoughts, bad thoughts. Be aware of any thoughts. Doesn't really matter what thoughts they are. And remind yourself that this thought about whoever or whatever it is doesn't mean anything. It's like things I see in this room. As you exhale, blow the thought out, look, open your eyes, look around. Just observe the room around you. Noticing everything from this non-judgmental place. It doesn't mean anything. Your only judgment on it is that it doesn't mean anything, that it's meaningless. Right? See what Yeshua's teaching us. So you're not judging it as good or bad, right or wrong. You're not judging the variations, the gradations of it. It's just, none of it's true. So as you look around, remind yourself that nothing that you see really means anything. And neither do your thoughts. Close your eyes briefly. Notice any thoughts going on and just say, this thought about whatever it is doesn't mean anything. It's the same. It's like the things that I think I see in this room. And you open your eyes again and look around. And make that connection in your mind between the thoughts internally and what you see externally. That's the purpose of this lesson. Starting to integrate the quadrants into the integral model, the interior, individual interior, subjective self, internal experience with the exterior of your perception, what you perceive in the world outside of you, starting to realize that both of those are illusory. You're thinking and your separate self and perceiving the world as outside of you and thinking about that world, it doesn't mean anything. Just like the things that you think you see don't mean anything. They're all created by the thoughts. Projection makes perception, as we discover as we get deeper into the course. So just dwell on that for a bit, try and anchor this understanding, this awareness. Set the intention to stay here in this higher awareness. Remind yourself of the lesson frequently when you need to. Any thought comes in, you can use this immediately to help you let go of that thought. This thought about whatever doesn't mean anything. And then it's like things I see in this room. It only needs to take you 5 seconds, 10 seconds to do, and just correct the thought and find the peace that surpasses all understanding that the Bible talks about lies in the letting go of the meaning to attach to these thoughts. And then you find peace and happiness and tranquility, which is what I wish for you. Yeah, so practice the lesson maybe again, one more time. I'll send this recording so you can listen to it. I'll send a shorter breath break as well. Listen to that and yeah, just keep practicing. This is actually a really, really profound truth in this lesson.
Yeah, that's good. Very good.
Very good. Very good. Yay!
Yay, yay. Mm-hmm.
All right. Thanks, Elaine.
Thank
So
you. So next week,
yeah, I'll see you. I'll see
Monday.
you. Can't make it on Sundays, eh? So I'll see you Monday.
It's just
Yeah,
Sundays because I have like my walking day. So I
yeah,
might be able to this Sunday because I think my friend's going to El Hierro. So possibly this Sunday, but
yeah.
yeah, I tend to keep the
Let's
Sunday for
let's try do Monday evening then.
okie doke.
Yeah, it's Monday evening at say 7. I'll let you know on the group,
Yeah,
Telegram and
yeah,
WhatsApp
no
and,
problem.
email.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks. Have a
So,
lovely weekend.
you too. Yeah.
All right.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Bye.
So that's a wrap for today. Thank you to Elaine for joining the session. If you enjoyed the session, then a couple of things you can do. One, subscribe to the channel. You'll be notified whenever I go live. You'll be able to access the recordings or the live streams. You can also go to lifebuild.com, find out more about the program. You can sign up to receive a free telegram messages every day where I send out with the daily quotes. You saw an example of that earlier. Teaching around those quotes, the ideas, a daily mind training lesson from A Course in Miracles with a short meditation to help you practice that lesson, as well as invitations to join these live calls with a link to join it in Zoom. So if you'd like to take another step in this direction of awakening, why not go to lifebuild.com, put in your mobile number, and just make sure you've got Telegram downloaded onto that mobile, which is a messaging app. You can get it on the Google Play Store or the App Store. Just search for Telegram. So hope you'll take another step, and I hope to catch you on the inside of the group soon, or in one of these live sessions maybe. Thanks for watching or listening, and namaste, which means the truth in me acknowledges and honors that same truth in you. And wishing you much